Hi, and welcome to the Tuesday, December 10th, 2019 special board meeting of the whole board to conduct a facilities committee meeting. We're going to start with introductions and administrative remarks. Mr. Brooks?
Do you want to introduce your committee first?
I do want to introduce the committee. I just was checking to see why he wasn't at the table, and I understand. We have everyone from the board here this evening, so Mrs. Stern, Mr. Moore, Dr. Babson will be back in a second, Mrs. Duffy, Mrs. Solomon, Mrs. Monahan, Mr. Jubileer, Ms. Goldman, our solicitor, Mr. Christofko, and a special welcome to our student rep, Allie Bauer, who's joining us this evening and got a real special meeting for her first one. So thank you so much for joining us. For people who don't know, we, on each of the committees of the board, have a member of the student body join us as a representative, both to bring a student perspective, but also, I think, to help them see how the board works. And it's a wonderful opportunity for them and also for us to have that asset available to us.
And Allie, welcome. And as a new student member, please know that if we should go long or if you have a ride coming at a certain time, knowing that we're already starting a half hour late for tonight, all right, please, we understand if you have to sneak out to get work done tonight, so that's fine. Other administrators might try to go with you, but don't, we might try to sneak out also, but no.
Send them back in.
At any time, but it's good to have you.
And that is fine.
I think we're going to start with public comment instead of. Is there any public comment this evening? Mr. Vajukas, yes. Nice to see you again.
Yes. It's been a while. So I just wanted to take a moment in light of the meeting that we had the other week and some of the comments that were made there about bringing all constituencies together for this project. I wanted to reassure all of you that from the outset, not only as the administration, but I and other parents personally have worked tirelessly to bring together all of the booster clubs and all of the involved parties from the outset. From November of last year, Ms. Addis and I ran a slideshow in the library at the Radnor High School for all the booster club presidents and officers. I got that list from Mr. Friel, and anybody who has contacted me with interest, I've added them to that list. The list is over 150 people long, and I personally send updates about what happens at these meetings and what the next steps are, and invite people, including some of the people who spoke at the last meeting, to contact me and make their concerns known. So you should be assured that people, not only has the administration worked tirelessly to communicate with people like the swim boosters and RAC and others, but the parents have done that also. So it was a little bit troubling to me at the meeting to have a situation where really people were so uninformed about what is going to happen in this project. And so I just wanted to take a moment to say to everybody, particularly with regard to the pool, what this committee did with regard to the conditions that we were aware of concerning the pool. First of all, you all, those of you who are tenured members of the board, know that the instructions to Schrader were not to look at the inside of the high school. It was explicit that they were not allowed to look at the inside of the high school, which is where the pool is. Despite that, Ken and Mark, Mike Friel, Dan, never kept their eye off the ball with regard to that facility, and always knew that at some point in time we were going to have to come back and address not only the safety issues in the pool, but also the ADA issues in the pool. There's been a suggestion that there's been no money spent on the pool. Actually, and Michelle can attest to this, over the last several years, there's been probably about $600,000 that's been spent on the pool. You don't see it because it's things like dehumidifiers, it's things like timers and necessary things that have to be done with the pool. But the suggestion that the pool itself has been ignored by the administration, from my research on it, is just simply not true. With regard to this project, there was suggestion that there was nothing except for an elevator that was going to be done. Just so you all understand specifically what is going to be done to the pool, and anybody else who's watching who cares to actually listen and think about this, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in pool improvements if this recommendation is accepted, including a perimeter deck level drainage system, $300,000, a new balance tank, $200,000, new water chemistry and UV systems, $58,000, replastering, $78,000, refurbishing diving stands, new starting platforms, additional depth markers, new automatic water level control, new timing system and conduit infrastructure, $193,000 for decking, including the potential for overruns in that regard. And then that's not even including redoing the locker rooms, putting in bathrooms, expanding the locker rooms, and also creating team rooms across the hallway by taking away some of the girls' locker room that's not utilized, which is a flexible space, and if we need to put bathrooms in there and things like that, that's something we can flex into. All of that specifically relates to the pool. On top of that, and what's the most disturbing to me is the amount of correspondence and other comments I've gotten about the elevators and how needless the elevator is. You have to do the elevator because that makes it ADA compliant. Rolling somebody or telling somebody to stand out on the decking away from their own families to watch a pool event is totally unacceptable. So I really don't want to hear about the elevator being unnecessary. The elevator is a key component of making that facility safe and ADA compliant. So you can see, as with all of this, and I know I'm running out of time, I'm sorry, we've spent a lot of time thinking about it. There's a lot of thought that's gone into it. No one's been left behind. This project addresses everybody's needs to the extent we can, and obviously in an attempt to be fiscally responsible. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Pajugas. We have a race to the mic. Mr. Henkel, good to see you again.
Thanks. You're pre-introducing me. Tim Henkel, 462 Parkley Road, in the Rosemont section of Radnor. I didn't really come today prepared to make many remarks, but I did want to come on the heels of last month's meeting, which I had kind of hoped would have happened in my absence and in the presence of my children and with some finality. And I've discussed this with some of you, a little discouraged that a vote didn't take place. But I clearly am here on behalf and in support of the infrastructure improvement project, which to me and my family and those who have supported this project is all about safety and accessibility for the exterior campus and all the things that need to go with it, which I think becomes part of the deliberate discussions that have happened over and over and over again. I actually think discussing them again and presenting them in list form and bullet point by bullet point is a waste of time today and does a disservice to all the work that you folks have all done, new members, past members, and those who aren't even on the board anymore. I certainly would say today, though, that I've gained a real appreciation, as has my family, of the amount of work that it takes to do the job that you guys do right and to do it well. It's there are different levels of effort, and to new board members, I would say, you get graded, and we will hold you accountable just as you hold us and the public accountable. I'm discouraged by what I saw in the video. I wasn't here at that last meeting. Some of the late entries of complaints about what could or should be done at the board. Jeff said it exactly right. The most disturbing comment and the one that just really points out the departure between what this project is about and what it isn't about, were the comments that were made about the availability of accessible seating. Now, we will simply accommodate someone who needs accessible seating by putting a chair by the poolside. That is exactly what's been going on at the football field. That is exactly what's been going on at the lacrosse field, and that is exactly the unsafe condition that that persists. And so to not lead with pool improvements that start with an elevator and access to those kinds of seating where people can sit together and get there safely is just a complete miss and a complete misunderstanding of what's been going on. That's as much, I think, coverage of those comments that I think that they really deserve. My main point here today is to say that the work has been done. It's time. You have done your jobs. You have done your research. You have taken the walks. You have, as candidates, have done I think the pre-election work of being prepared for this moment. The public outreach has been done. The design concepts were done. The solicitation of design professionals, the vetting of the right design professionals who are going to look at the project from the right lens and with the right focus. All that work has been done. Joint meetings of the facilities and finance committee meetings has all been done. And they've all been done right here in front of us, those who have cared about this project. So if there are elements of this project that needs to change and need to morph and need to become just a little bit different to satisfy really the finality of a very good project, then those people should come and they should attend and they should be here and they should work side by side with you and your professionals to achieve those outcomes. We can't just come and demand things. We need to advocate for them. That has been a lesson that we've learned along the way during this process, and I think a lesson that many people in this community could use to hear and appreciate it at this, what I hope is the end of a long and positive road. So thank you. I implore you, take a vote, say yes. Let's move on with this project so that it can become real. Thanks.
Good evening, my name's Doug McCone. I've been around a long time, but I no longer have kids in the schools, so I just qualify as a member of the general public. I was aware that there was a project going on to bring the building and bleachers and a few other items into ADA compliance. Until I retired 2 years ago, I was the handicap accessibility officer for the government for 6 states, so I fully support all of that kind of stuff. I was not aware of the extent of the project, though. There are many items more than I had understood, probably all necessary, I was also not aware of the cost. I'm looking at this and adding it up, it's like $28 million. And this will have an impact on, the total budget and taxes and so forth. And while I'll be very interested to see the elements that you present, assuming that you present more of it tonight, if I don't know about it, I suspect a lot of people in the community don't know about it. Not that you haven't tried to get it out there, but I don't know how else you would improve the situation. In any event, you need to make sure that more people in the general public know exactly the kinds of things that are going on. I mean, I still haven't seen drawings or any kind of sketches other than what's being displayed up there of what your plan is. And I'm reasonably aware, so I just recommend very strongly that you go out and tell everybody in the world what's going on, because I haven't seen anything about it of significance in the newspaper, although I sometimes get fed up with the particular publication. Thank you very much.
Sorry, is there any other public comment? Okay, if there's no more public comment, we're going to move on to the approval of the minutes from the October 15th, 2019 Facilities Committee. Most of you were not on that committee.
It's just you and
The minutes looked fine, Sarah.
I was just say, does anyone have any concerns with the minutes? Okay, great. Do we have to make a motion to approve them? No. I would just approve, okay. So then the next agenda item, Mark, do you want to do the approvals first, or did you want to step forward and do the infrastructure project?
Actually, I'd like to do the administrative remarks if I could.
Okay, fine, great.
So I have several of them. Good evening. Welcome to new board members, and welcome back for those of you who've been here before. So PZO Gym, let me just bring you up to speed on that. That's been an ongoing conversation piece. The township, the insurance broker for both the township and the school district and I met to review the floor in the gym early last week. It was determined that there were still some areas of concern, and Miller Flooring, who was the contractor who came in to do the work, came back Thursday and Friday of last week to correct those concerns. I'm happy to report that Saturday the gym opened for the Radnor Youth Basketball and other groups, including adult pickleball players, which I didn't know what pickleball was until I walked in on them the other day. The other issue, one of the other issues is PennDOT had, the township had approached us about getting a school zone light along, a 15-mile school zone light along Radnor Chester Road. PennDOT approved it, and that will be installed in the next 30 days. The trail update, we have the attorneys and for the trail and the trail organizer will be meeting this week to discuss the easement agreement. Really don't have any further details at this point. The bus garage, as some of you may remember, we had a fire at the bus garage and it's an insurance claim. We're putting out for competitive bid. We have a pre-bid meeting this week, and we anticipate getting before you all in January for approval for that. And again, that would be paid for by the insurance company. I'd like to report that for the infrastructure project, the district had advertised 4 different times and dates for the tours at the high school, and those were conducted. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of public participation in that. There were some folks who called who were interested, but I know one night it was pouring rain, so I didn't blame anybody else for not staying in the rain like me. So, and then the last thing is, so you all know that after the last general meeting, we, Mr. Friel, myself, Mrs. Dyko, Steve, and John Bray from Atlantic Aquatic had met with representatives of the pool parents who showed up at the last meeting, as well as the coaches, to discuss the project and gave them an opportunity to provide some feedback and some questions to the architect as well as Mr. Bray. And we've decided to put Coach Robinson as part of our steering committee moving forward so that we have input from him for the pool, just to bring up to speed on that. At this point, one of the things that we're asking for you all consent on is we have a tractor a John Deere tractor that we have. It's about 22 years old. It's rusting out. It's in pretty bad shape. We barely got it to get through part of this year so far. We're looking to replace that with a Ventrac 4500 tractor, and that's on a state contract system. We get 3 proposals. All 3 came in exactly the same amount at $32,000 and change. So that will be something on the agenda moving forward. The next item on the agenda tonight is to talk about the infrastructure project. We asked Steve Behrens, and this is Hugh. I'm sorry. Sure.
Hold on 2 seconds. Can we just,
You need some guidance from your committee about.
the approval, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, because it'll be on a consent agenda probably.
Right, so, but we want the whole board to vote on it since everybody's here.
No, just
put it Okay.
on notes, just consent,
Okay,
yeah.
so we're gonna
You
just.
want approval from your committee.
Okay.
Put it on next week's agenda for
Do
the
I,
board
so
approval.
do I have any, are there any concerns from the committee about adding the tractor to the, with the snow blower attachment?
Just a question, what do you do with it?
What do we do with the tractor, the snow
Yes.
blower attachment? Well, the tractor is pretty versatile. We can use it in addition to the snow blowing, but primarily when the snow is blowing, it will take care of some small areas along the parking lots and the corners, as well as the sidewalks that go all the way out to Route 30 and back. We have to plow or snow blow, as well as from Route 30 on King of Prussia Road up to the bus garage. So we take care of that as well. So that's the primary function with the snow blower for that, as well as sidewalks on the campus itself. The trucks will take care of the roads itself for the snow. And again, it depends upon the depth of the snow.
So this piece of equipment is only at the high school?
Correct. Every school would have their own individual piece of equipment. The high school one just happens to be a little bit more robust because you have a much larger area, much larger footprint to take care of.
So we don't have this exact piece of equipment at all the other schools?
That's
We
correct.
just have it at the high school and it's old?
Yes, that's correct.
what
Well,
you're
let me say, we have another piece of equipment at each school at various ages. This particular one I'm proposing will be the first time the district purchased this particular piece of equipment. And the reason why I wanted to get this is it gives me a lot more versatility with implements moving forward for our guys to do some work in-house versus contracting them out.
Thank you.
Thank you. So committee's okay with putting that on the consent agenda for next month? Okay. So next, you want to move on and talk
Sure.
about the high school infrastructure project?
Sure, I'd like to introduce to you again Steve Behrens from Breslin Architects, and Hugh, and I'm going to mess up your last name, so please jump in here. Cadzo, and he is from ELA Sports, both of which have been in the Hugh was on the project from the inception, I guess, with the Schrader Group, and then Steve's picked up since that point when we dropped off the Schrader Group and picked up to go to the next level. So just to clarify a couple of things that have come up, some questions that seem to be out there for clarification. When the board is voting on what you're going to be asked to vote upon, you're not voting on spending $28 million. What you're voting on is, we got together a general idea of what we were looking at, put together some general numbers, and came up with a conceptual idea of what we need to move forward. The next step in this process is to pay the architect and Hugh and other consultants to refine that down into drawings, come up with finishes, come up with, sorry. Usually you tell me I'm not speaking loud enough, so no. So again, drawings, finishes, get down to the nuts and bolts as to, are we going to have shower curtains? Are we going to have individual shower stalls? What type of colors are we going to use? Things along those lines. So we're nowhere near that at this point. What you're asked to do is to approve the architect to be able to move forward to get you to the point where we can, through the conversations, identify with a more detailed pricing what some of these items are going to cost, what some of the finishes are going to cost, whether or not we want to have something called an add or delete alternates. So for example, in a project, it's not uncommon, and I'll use flooring for example, that we may have a base bid saying that we want to put down VCT tile, which is like what's on this floor here. And we may have an add alternate for something called terrazzo, which is a poured epoxy stone-based product that gives you 50 years worth of life theoretically, whereas this may give you 25. And then again, we may have another add alternate to say, we want to go ahead and replace the VCT tile with carpet tile, which may only give you 5 years depending upon the traffic. So at that point, it gives us a great deal of flexibility to say, here's what we think we want, but here are some other options. So when the bids come in, we can take a look at that and go, well, you know, that VCT tile is costing us a little bit more money than we thought. Maybe we want to go carpet tile that's a little bit cheaper. These types of things are yet to be determined. So I know a lot of people that I've talked to in the community, you know, wonder why we're not to there yet. We will be at the end of this process if approved, but just to clarify that we're not there yet. And this is to give us more detail to be able to refine into some of the things that will give us a much better idea of what the exact costs are going to be. There's contingencies built into this because at this point we don't know all the details. As these guys start the design process, this will give us the opportunity to define that even further. Now, one of the other things that we were asked to do is look at the architect fee scenarios. And I provided each of you a sheet that gave you 3 different scenarios, actually 4. So one of the concepts that we talked about was adding a new access road between Radnor Chester Road and Lancaster Avenue. And there's been some, you know, concern about whether or not we can even do that from PennDOT. So the idea was, instead of spending a lot of money in architect fees and engineering fees to design this, only to have PennDOT tell us at the very end you can't do it, the thought was if we were to break this particular aspect out a little bit and say, okay, here's some benchmarks that we can look at and decide as an organization, how far do we want to take this without wasting a lot of money. So the last scenario I'll give you here is probably the most common one folks do. They go ahead and say, let's go ahead and design everything. Let's put it out as an alternate in the bid. The bids come back and you say, wow, that access road was budgeted for 1.2 million. It came in at 1.4 million, if you're even allowed to do it. We say, we don't want to do that anymore. We say, for whatever reason, that's too expensive. We don't want to move forward with that, whatever it happens to be. We've already then expended, you know, basically, you know, $245,000 in architect's fees to get you to that point. What we're suggesting is that we peel that onion back and have benchmarks, especially for those areas that we believe are going to be the most interesting for conversations moving forward, and we think that access road is going to be one of them. So on the architect scenarios, we have a $10,000 fee for a traffic study. We can probably use aspects of the traffic study that was done in 2013-14 for the other project, and to save some money. And if we were then to say, go to PennDOT with that, they would want to probably have some more detail before they could make a decision, that we would say, okay, we'd have the architect do a schematic design with that traffic study, and for a total of $40,674, we could come up with a schematic design, take these traffic study and go to PennDOT and go, here, what do you guys think? And if at that point they say no, we're only out the $40,675. If they say yes, then we can build upon that to go even further. But again, I was looking to make sure that we weren't waiting to the very end, spending a lot of money that maybe be needless if PennDOT's going to immediately shoot us down because of safety issues or traffic issues or some other issue that they might have. Hopefully that gives you a little general idea of what we're looking at here, and certainly maybe Steve can go into more detail on this if you're comfortable with that. If needed, but certainly it gives you some options moving forward. So schematic design is one thing, the construction documents are another, and then of course the last thing is getting everything out for bid and then not doing it, because part of the architect's fees is construction administration, which is 20% of his fees would be for the actual administration of any construction. And obviously if we say, no, we don't want to do the new access road, we wouldn't spend the 20%, but we would have already invested then $245,388, if that makes sense in that scenario. I know that's a lot to throw at you. Hopefully I explained that without too much confusion and using terminology that sometimes I use terminology that I take for granted everybody knows, and people look at me and go, Mark, could you please speak English? So if you guys have a question or anything like that about that, please feel free to ask. We're happy to accommodate you on that.
Does anyone have questions before, on this specific piece before Mark moves forward?
Mark, I'm so sorry. I actually am not sure I'm following the way you guys are doing this at all. So where it keeps saying the potential fee reduction, is that based off of at every point, it's based off of the 306,735?
Yes,
Because that's the total fee to design just those three components?
that's correct. It's estimated to be a total of $4,085,000 for those three components. His fee based upon that figure is $306,735. And if we're only going with the schematic design, we're only going to be charged 10% of that cost to get to that level, which would be the $30,674, and that would be in complement with the $10,000 traffic study for $40,600.
So what do you mean by potential fee reduction? That's the part, is that just terminology of,
How much money you're saving?
no, I'm not saying it
It's money we're
correctly.
not spent, it's,
Money you're
what
not
he's
spending.
saying is, if you're looking at the 28 million, here's a way to maybe save 266,000 off that, because if we end up not going anywhere, we've not spent that piece. Right. I don't know that there's really a savings so much as, it is a savings, rather, these are all savings as against giving instructions to
Let me-
plan everything now.
Let me ask my question differently.
Sure.
It's gonna cost us 10% of the 306,735 to get to the first stage. It's gonna
Correct.
cost us 65% of the 306,735 to get to the second stage.
Correct.
So then walk me through what the third scenario is.
The third scenario is that we did all the design that we need to do. We put them out in bid documents. Contractors bid on this, and we decide at some point after the bid documents come in that you don't want to do the work. But you've already committed to all the design work to get to that point, as well as all the bid documents that the architect would put together to get you out for a bid and get those bids back.
So, why do these three numbers, 10%, 65, and 20?
80.
Thank
the-
you.
the
You know where I'm
20%
going with my
is- yeah,
question, right?
The 20% is the inverse. It's part
That's the
not-
80% point.
Right, yes. that's
Thank
the
you.
80%.
I wasn't following after the 65. Thank you. I'm good.
Anybody
Just,
else? Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, and I don't know if this helps at all, but based on the conversations and some of the questions that happened both at the last meeting and conversations since that with board members, Steve and Mark put this together, and I'll try to give a summary, a different way of looking at it, or really what Mark was saying, because there's a lot of numbers, a lot of percentages in there. But take, for example, everything in that first item that have to do with the new access road. So take, for example, that access road, and let's say next week, so we're not looking for a vote tonight. We scheduled as of the last board meeting that tonight is a committee meeting, even though it's a committee of the whole board. That the idea was that the earliest now at this point we'd make a vote would be next week. We could look to put on, depending on this conversation tonight, we could put on, on the agenda for a vote next week. Tonight is an opportunity to have discussions and ask questions and take the time we need to, talk to both you and Steve and Mark about these pieces. This gives an example of one aspect, and some board members had requested and asked could we see a little bit more of a breakdown? So take one example of the new access road, the maintenance building, the classroom interior alterations, and you add those all up. And if we say to the architect next week, you know what? Move forward with the schematics, because our next step is just moving forward with schematics, is approval to engage him to develop schematics. We move forward, but we say, let's figure out whether that access road is even possible. He believes around $10,000 would need to be spent to figure that out, and then we would have a milestone. What are the milestones we'd have where we'd be able to say, it is possible or it isn't possible, and we'd be out $10,000. So if we find out it's not possible, then that whole aspect of the project, I don't think we'd be looking at anymore if we went down this road. The other phases show the other milestones there are, that as he develops those schematics, and somewhere in these milestones, up to the moment where we actually approve the bids, how much dollars we could potentially have spent on architect schematics that if we decide not to do it. Does that make sense? So where the money makes sense to me to look at is the cost to the district of, the 40,000, the cost to the district of the 107, the 107 and the 245. So there's milestones within this project as we move forward, and for us, we need to decide, how much are we going to engage the architect now in the next phase. So tonight's opportunity is to ask all the questions we want. What other things do we need to know in order to get to that point where we can decide that we want to engage the architect in the next phase? Are there, he has, one of the other questions that was asked at the last meeting was, has the architect met what we hired him to do up to this point, and Hugh and Steve together? And essentially, yes, they have, with the drawings and the conceptual pieces they have put together with the costs. That being said, if we want to ask them to look at other pieces or make some adjustments, we certainly can do that. If we do that, though, we're going beyond what we have engaged them for. I think we have their engagement for the December, January meetings. Beyond that, we start going beyond what we engaged them for, and if we start looking at additional designs, we're going beyond what we have engaged them for up to this point. Is that a fair summary? Yes. Okay.
You're not mic'd, just, and I'm sorry, I have one more question about the math on this page. Just that middle number where it says 65%. So what that's saying is if we go through design development, but you don't prepare the construction documents, the 65% is the 199, not 107. So is it 35%? We're at a 35% cost there, and the cost is the 107, or we're at the 65% cost and it's 199? Because 360 times 65% is 199. So I want to be clear what that stage is actually costing.
I think how it's being presented here is actually both ways. In other words, the 199 is the reduction, the amount of money that isn't spent on that remaining 35%, whereas the cost to the district of 107 is what is being spent, that 35%.
So that's a 35%.
That's right.
That's the 35% benchmark, not 65.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Does your calculator agree? Okay.
Basically, two ways to look at these dollars, and the one way is to look at it, the total project and how much it costs, and we're not doing, if we decide not to do the entire project, there's also the way of looking at this is if we tell the architect to move forward, what are the milestones, and if we should decide we don't want to move forward with a piece of the project, how much have we invested in work and schematics?
Right.
Does anybody else have questions about this piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to look at it that way. We talked about this. I'm just not sure that the way this is laid out is as clear as it could be. I'd like to maybe propose revisiting how this is laid out, because as in the interest of transparency and engaging our community, I think all the costs associated with this project are something that we need to be clear about. I think that, it's my understanding that, and hopefully I'm right here, if I'm not, please tell me. So the fee for the architect to design the entire project is $306,000.
No,
No.
no, it's for these
Just for
three
those.
pieces.
Yeah,
it's
this was a way of showing an example of looking at, because of the various disparate pieces within the overall project, if there was something that was determined not to move forward, what would be the cost impact of the fees? So this is purely looking at those 3 of those 12 line items that were presented last time.
Okay.
So, a scenario could be developed with any of the other pieces. This was just an example that we were asked to prepare.
I mean, just conceptually, globally, I mean, I feel like there are 2 tracks that at least I feel are important. I do think we have to keep moving forward with this. We've put a lot of time and energy into it, and I'm not saying put a shovel in the ground. I'm saying that we need to keep doing our due diligence and moving this project forward to make sure we get to some final point, and sometime sooner rather than later. Simultaneously, I think we have to be sensitive to being as transparent and communicative with all kinds of constituents, not just those who are regularly appearing, but those who aren't. So as we move along, I'm just asking if we can try to, for the lay people, for lack of a better word, try to make these costs that are of concern to every taxpayer who's participating in this understand exactly what it is we're talking about. I've been following this pretty closely, and this document, I mean, we just got it tonight, unless I was missing something. So one of my challenges is being able to read something on the fly, especially with other ambient noise. So part of my challenge in understanding it could be just sitting here and trying to look at it in this place and time. Alone in a quiet room, it might be a different story. But I'm concerned that there are many people out there who, despite our best efforts, still are not aware of what we're doing. And I wouldn't want anybody who cares deeply about this project, as I do, and I think many of us in this room tonight do, to be compromised by people saying, how come we didn't know about this? So even in this particular discussion, I would appreciate maybe us thinking about a way to better illuminate what it is we're talking about, going in terms of these architect fee scenarios. I don't want them to hold us up. I just want to better understand what they represent, and I'm having trouble with that.
Well, again, this is not some new architectural fees or anything like that. This is just an opportunity to try to help frame the conversation for tonight. So the board had asked and said that, had looked at, there's a lot of different pieces to this project. So if the next step is to engage the architect to develop schematic drawings, and we tell the architect, gosh, go and develop the schematic drawings, but we have no idea if PennDOT would give us approval for a new access road, and we find out from PennDOT that we can't do that, how much money have we lost by engaging the architect? So this is just to try to help frame the conversation that we think we would have lost only about, and I say lost, it's worth the money to me, if you ask my opinion, to know and to put to rest forever, because we're looking through back files from years ago, whether or not this has ever been solved, what's the urban legend about our ability to add an access road or not. But we believe around $10,000, we believe we could get to the point where we could present something to PennDOT to find out if that road is possible.
And I don't disagree, Ken, and I appreciate your saying it just like that, because it's really clear, better than my reading it off of a piece of
Right.
paper. And I totally agree with you. I think we have to move forward to the next stage to better understand what it is we're talking about and what's involved. I just didn't understand this particular sheet. I like to understand what material is presented. So I didn't really understand what this was saying specifically. I understood conceptually that we're trying to figure out what money potentially in terms of architect fees we could lose if we take a detour in one aspect of the project. But the way that's illuminated here was a little challenging for me.
So I absolutely appreciate that, and I never like getting things last minute. This is the first I've seen of it too. I think Mark and the architects were trying to be responsive to some last minute questions and requests that came up during the tours and things like that. So I think, you know, this was what they put together quickly, and certainly they're here to explain the questions.
And really,
so
it's
we'll
not
work
as much
that
on the
with you.
fly as anticipating that would be the question that would come up tonight. And so if that had come up tonight,
Right.
somebody would have said, oh, gosh, would have been
Right.
great if we thought about that.
Right.
So we were trying to think about how to help frame some of the discussions tonight, as one of the questions may be, well, are we moving forward with all the schematics next week? Or are we going to move forward with just a piece of it? The opportunity tonight is to, you know, ask the questions about the entire project. You know, one of the struggles we have, you know, as a district with any topic we look at is we put together, you know, a steering committee, and I want to thank again the members of our steering committee. I know we have some of the parents that are here and administrators that are part of the steering committee, and I invite them to be part of the discussion tonight too as the discussion moves along. We put together a group, and for well over a year, that group is in, and I was part of that steering committee. They're in a room together with two different architectural firms that we've had that have been working with the steering committee, and there is a lot of debating that goes on. There is a lot of ideas that go on. There are meetings that were scheduled for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they wound up being 4 hours. There is a lot of different options that are looked at based on two different community feedback meetings, different feedback from different groups of, have we thought about this? Could we look at that? Have we thought about a parking garage? Because parking is such an issue on our campus. There is a lot of pieces that steering committee debates and looks at in order to get to the point where we are today. And it's a shame that whenever we have topics like this, whether it's sleep, whether it's this, we should almost record all those endless hours. Not that anybody would really want to watch them, but it's hard, I think, for a board and for our community to see, where did this come from? Where did all of a sudden these designs, you know, that we've arrived at this point? If you haven't been following the community meetings, if you haven't been following the feasibility study where the concepts were presented. So all of those things have come not out of this is a wish list of items. They have developed out of an identification of what have been some of the challenge, what have been the places that have just been completely inaccessible when we look at to ADA accessibility, and then we look at some of the age of our infrastructure there, and that's why we've been really discussing this more as a you know, accessibility and wellness initiative moving forward. But tonight, as much as possible, we want to give the board that opportunity to have that discussion, to ask those questions, and that's why I would invite members of the steering committee. You know, they could stay in the seats they are now, but they can join in as well, if that's okay with the board, as we have these questions and discussions tonight.
I did have one more question on that, if that's okay. I don't want to preempt anybody else who has a question though, Sarah, so how do you, okay. This is just an access road question. As I was driving by the other day on Lancaster Avenue and trying to envision where is that access road potentially going to go, it reminded me that we have the trail.
Yes.
And I couldn't figure out how those two, do they interface with each other somehow, the trail and potentially in the access road?
Yeah.
They do.
Well, actually, if I could piggyback my question, which has kind of been burning for me, and I think it may actually be somewhat aided by your question. You know, at some point, not this second, but we do need an update of the status of the property survey and the wetlands survey that we approved a month or so ago, because, you know, those pieces would all have to be kind of laid into a schematic or laid into one another to understand, okay, here's where we're talking about putting this building, and here's where the wetlands are, and here's where the creek is, and here's where the trail would, I mean, there's layers of all that, and here's your property boundaries, and, oh, here's your impervious coverage, and, which, that's actually the number I'm most anxious to see, but in any event, so I'm kind of curious, along with the status of the trail being drawn on this, the surveys we're doing, and the wetland survey.
So can I just interrupt, because neither of those questions was actually about the architect fee scenarios, which is where I think right, so I think they're both important questions, I want to hear them answered, but I wanted to make sure, does anyone else have questions about specifically the scenarios? Go ahead, Bradley.
So I understand the idea that, just by way of illustration, there might be an aspect of the project where you can do a little bit with the architect, and if you decide that module, for lack of a better word, the access road, if that doesn't go forward, you don't have the schematic drawn all the way and you haven't expended those fees. Have I followed that so far? Mm-hmm. So, putting aside the question of taking modules in and taking modules out, and also putting aside the question of down the road whether you're going to have the carpeted floor or the tile floor, those detail levels about where your costs might fluctuate once you go out to bid. At this stage right now, how much flexibility do we as a board still have to figure out what the public will support in terms of making adjustments within any of these modules? And just by way of illustration, not to prejudice with this one way or the other, hypothetically speaking, what if we believe the public would support an even bigger investment in the field house instead of an open second floor, some kind of enclosed second floor that would cost more money? Or conversely, what if we believe the public would prefer a concession stand, one story, and fewer improvements to the field house that would cost less money? How much, by asking for schematics now, are we cutting ourselves off from making those kinds of adjustments? Same kind of thing for the fitness area. If we realize that the fitness area that's been proposed with this isn't large enough for what anticipated student need, how much flexibility is there for a schematic for a larger fitness area? Or conversely, if we don't think the public would support a fitness area of this size, how much flexibility is there for a smaller fitness facility in that addition? When we make a decision to ask the architect to make these schematics, how much are we cutting off future flexibility?
Can I take that
Please.
one? That is, what you're describing is precisely what would occur during the schematic design process. So what we've laid out now as a concept is taking the comments that have been received, the work that has preceded this, and developing it into a comprehensive option, comprehensive plan with some phasing, some schedule, some budgetary aspects of it. There has not been, with every single component, a detailed analysis of the kinds of things that you're describing. So there just wasn't time and so forth for that. So that is expected to be part of that schematic design process. So things like making those we have the concept of a field house, right? And we have those programmatic components that we want to include in that. But certainly a decision about, enclosing a second floor or eliminating a second floor, that's what would be fleshed out during the schematic design phase. And the same thing would be true of, you raise a great point about the size of any particular component, specifically in terms of square footage. The fitness room is a prime example. Well, we need to dig into it deeper to say precisely how many pieces of equipment, what types of equipment are going to be in the space. We have a general concept of who the users are going to be, but we need to drill down and do it further and say, what are those individuals going to be doing? How many of them at one time? And then that's what starts to inform the size of the space, how it's being used. So that's exactly what would be done during the schematic design process.
Okay. So just one follow-up by that, and this is by way of feedback to the administration more than a comment on the work of the steering committee at all. But, just by analogy, I think about the work of the sleep committee, and one thing I really liked about the sleep committee presentation is that there were options. We could change the times around this way and it'll cost this much. We could change the times around this way and it'll cost this much, and it'll have these potential consequences. And within any of these modules, and certainly for the project as a whole, it feels a lot better as a board member and feels more accountable to the public to be able to say, we've considered these different options at these different levels. What are the consequences? What are the costs? And I understand that the steering committee has brought us this proposal, which is the recommended proposal. So I'm not saying we need to reinvent and recreate and read out the transcript of the steering committee's work. But if this is something that can happen at that next stage, when going forward with schematics, where we're given options rather than just make sure that the fleshing out of these modules leads us to have options and choices within them.
I just I just want to make one point in that regard. I understand what you're saying, and I think that Ken, in particular, really drove us during the meetings to have options and to consider options. The thing that we struggle with is, for instance, the field house. There are things in the field house that we need to have for code and for ADA accessibility that if we don't put them there, we have to put them somewhere else. So when you start breaking this down, one floor or 2 floors is easy. Enclosure, non-enclosure is easy. But if you don't create a team room there, where is the team room going to be? If you don't create the bathrooms, where are the bathrooms going to be? So there was a lot of work done at the committee level to make those decisions about where the most cost-effective, efficient, and code compliant and ADA compliant place to put these things would be. So if we decide if we give you an option, let's say, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm just trying to give you an idea about these are why the meetings took 4 hours, because when we start talking about just bathrooms, if you don't put bathrooms there, you have to have enough bathrooms for one event. And we know by code what that's going to have to be. They have to be accessible to both fields. So how do you do that in a way that's ADA accessible, convenient for the parties, without putting it there? And so if you said to me, I don't want to have a team room there and everything else, I think that's something that Steve's saying we can discuss size. But if you say I don't want a field house, then my question is going to be to you, then where are you going to put the bathrooms? Where are you going to put the team rooms? And then it's not really a menu anymore, because we've got to take that piece. It's like a puzzle. And once you eliminate any part of this, you start you're just required to do some of this somewhere else. And so that's the struggle that we went through, and the reason why it took us a year, and I've spent more time with all these people in my family on vacation, literally. And it's been a very thoughtful process. So that would be my caveat to kind of trying to give options like that.
And that comment is well received, and I get it. My spouse was on the sleep committee, and it was frustrating for people to come forward and say, like, oh, have you considered this? Have you considered that? So I get it, and that's very much well received. So the feedback to the administration is, where there is flexibility, show us the flexibility. And if there's a reason there's not flexibility, walk us through it so that we understand what we're voting on.
Sure, perfectly understandable.
I would take that one step further, actually, Bradley, because Jeff, I think every time you step up to the dais and give us an explanation of the process, with all due respect to everybody else who's been involved, Jeff seems to be the most vocal, so I'm going to call him out right now about that.
Unless you're in the meetings, then it was Sue.
I don't even. But that kind of narrative is really valuable. And there's one responsibility I think we have as a board that goes above and beyond perhaps the work of the steering committee, which has had a Herculean lift as far as this goes and deserves all the credit in the world for getting us to this point and wherever we go from here. But that is that we have to be able to take those stories and sell them to our community. Outside of this, it could just be my opinion, but outside of the footprint of our district, we have a lot of other people, one of them's here tonight perhaps, but maybe there are others, who need that same narrative too. And so what I would say is that, in lieu of the options that Bradley was talking about, those talking points, Jeff, that you have that justify why this is the proposal that it is, are critical to sort of make it over to our communications department and continue to educate all of us and your fellow stakeholders in this project so that everybody can be explaining why. I wouldn't have known that about the bathrooms. I mean, every time you speak, I learn something new. So I think that's...
I'm available to go to any holiday party to speak about this.
I wouldn't go that far. But I, maybe it's just me, and thinking through a marketing lens, and a salesperson's lens, professional hazard there. But those are the kinds of things we need to hear in order to make sure that anybody who asks us those questions when you're not around, we understand that. So I would piggyback on Bradley's request to make that maybe get some administrative support to take those stories and translate them into any marketing we might do beyond the footprint of this, well, even within the footprint of the district, because the people you're talking to seem to be pretty exclusively high school people, and there are middle school folks who use the fields
I mean,
too, right?
Yeah, so I've reached out, we've gotten lists of students and groups and athletic teams in the middle school and pushed out to them, just pay attention. Not, I mean, everything that I personally have written and that any parent on this committee has written is not saying vote for it or against it. It's just saying, make your voice heard. If you like it, if you don't like it, if you think we should do some, part, all, whatever, just make your voice heard. Because, I mean, I have a tremendous amount, I totally understand people looking at it and saying this is a significant amount of money. I think we all, the entire time that we've spent doing this, we've tried, we've had that in the forefront of our mind, that it's a significant investment. You know, we are right-sizing certain areas. The stands on the stadium field are going to be smaller. I mean, there are other things that people would love to do that we're not doing. And again, that's something that you know, we've had to make some really tough decisions about what's going to work and what's not going to work, and making a recommendation. I think that I'm certainly happy to work with the administration, but I think everybody understands all the hard decisions that we made and how we got here, and we should be able to translate.
Can I just make a suggestion, because I want to try and keep us on track, because we're already at the hour mark. No, and Mark and I have already talked, and Mark is already working with Michael Petiti about a communications plan, so I'm sure that will.
Jeff on video, maybe?
All right, well.
But the other question I had was, Jeff, I think I heard you say that you have sent regular update emails from the steering committee to members of the public.
So not from the steering, just to be clear, not from the steering, from me personally, not purporting to represent the steering committee in any way.
If there are members of the board who would like those as background, do you still have copies of those? Would you be willing to send those to people on the board?
Absolutely.
Okay. So
So-
if people want to let Jeff know if they'd like copies of those, I think that would provide some extra background for things that I know because I was on the steering committee, but not everybody does.
Okay, I'm really confused about the structure of this meeting.
So that's why I'm
So-
trying to keep us back on track. If other people have questions about this architect fee scenario, it's
Well, all
great,
right,
but then I want to move
The
on.
architect fee thing is a tiny, tiny portion. We haven't even decided.
Exactly, that's why I'm
Well,
trying to keep us on
so
track.
Is that what you're?
I'm trying to get
gonna
us
look
back to Mark
to?
and the architect
Oh, so
presentation.
is Mark, are you going to present these options to us, or are we going to have a discussion as a board about
He-
what we want to
Mark
do?
and the architects are gonna present all that.
All right, so you haven't even given your
No,
presentation?
we took
Gotcha.
questions on the scenarios because there were a lot of confused faces.
Sarah, earlier,
Have- yes.
just very quick.
No,
'cause-
go for it. I want to make sure we cover the fees because I know that's a piece that's very
Sure.
sensitive.
I'll just be very kind of to the point here. I think kind of a broader conversation that Amy was sort of alluding to, Brad alluded to a little bit too, is that, you know, given that we're a volunteer board, we are experts in other things other than this. It would be helpful to get some kind of education about the process, about the architectural development process. So for example, you know, I'm kind of inferring here that architect's fee for schematic design only, architect's fee for construction documents, bidding, construction administration, and for I mean, I'm assuming that those are different sets of activities that incur different costs, but maybe a little bit more education about what those steps are, I think could be helpful. I think that's sort of what Amy's talking about a little bit. I think that's sort of what's being discussed here, that we could get a little bit, you know, without, like as Ken is saying, without, you know, having to trawl through hours of video or minutes or whatever, just a little bit more information about the process in general, I think
guys
could
have
be
a
quite helpful. yeah.
process moving forward, like what are the next milestones and what happens next? So we're at a point now where we have concepts and we need to make a decision on what we want to engage the architect to draw schematic drawings. We could have, Steve, you could talk about what are some of the next milestones and what comes next. Is that what would be helpful?
I think, you know, I don't know who has the time to do this or whose remit it would be, but some kind of, you know, several page report from a 10,000-foot view of, you know, here are some of the steps, you know, here's a flow chart.
How about if we
Can I
give
make
an
a-
explanation
can-
right now and see if we
That
get
would
a
be-
report?
that
Have
would
them
be
give an
fine.
explanation right now.
Yeah,
That would-
but not a 2 or 3 page report. It's a
Right.
full-
But just,
So, can I just jump in here real quick? So one of the things I did for Cheltenham when I was there is because the board had many questions about some of their construction processes. I'm sorry, some of the construction processes they had. So I put together a multi-page booklet that basically walked you through from conceptual plan, I have an idea, we need to build a blank, right up to, here's what you do to sign off on the paperwork to make sure that all your Ts are crossed and Is are dotted. Let me take a look, see if I can recover that. Bring that to you all. Obviously, I changed Cheltenham to Radnor,
Yeah.
just so you have that as a basic guideline
Yeah.
as to what the process is.
That would be great.
You know, that I think might be helpful.
Yeah, I think it would be great, because, I mean, to Amy's point, this is a little bit inside baseball. I kind of get the general idea, but I knew, and you were trying to help us here, which is great, but I think something like that would be extremely helpful. I don't know if I'm speaking for others here on the board, but I know for me personally, and you know, to what Bradley was saying earlier, also good to know, you know, what's a la carte, what's fixed menu, you know, those kinds of breakdowns would also be, I think, helpful.
So I have,
Fees.
not on the fees.
So can we let Mark do his presentation?
Yes, will we have an opportunity at the end
Absolutely.
to,
Ask
because I think this is out of whack a little bit, but, so, yeah.
So what we wanted to do was just go through and have an opportunity to discuss each of the line items that we had there on the original project, just to go through there and answer any questions that you all might have. I'll just do a brief outline on some of the things to give an idea why we are where we are. So when I first got here in February, the committee had already started meeting. They had a couple public meetings. And again, their original charge was to look at the bleachers. That then looked at, you had groups come in to say, well, you can't put the bleachers in without ADA. So they expanded it out to ADA. Expanded out to say, okay, well, if we're going to do the bleachers, we now have to have bathrooms, because now you suddenly get into a code issue. You have to have a certain number of toilet facilities per, X number of thousands of people that you might have. We don't meet that currently. We're a pre-existing non-conforming use. Once we go ahead and modify this, we now have to meet the new standard moving forward. Back in 1960, 57, or whatever that was, the bleachers were put in, there wasn't a whole lot of codes going on, right? So today we have much more in the way of regulations that we have to follow. So we looked at that and said, okay, what do we have to do? And we try to break it out and say, in Prevost Field, we need to have the bleachers. The retaining wall is immediately behind the bleachers. And one of the important aspects of the retaining wall is, remember, you have a pool with 120,000 gallons of water. There's a certain amount of pressure, if we don't have a retaining wall, that could relieve that out, and Prevost will turn into a pool, right? So we want to make sure we have a retaining wall that can hold back a skating rink. Perfect. Yeah, in the summer, you want me to have ice out there too, no problem. So we also talked about and said, well, one of the major things that clearly we are deficient here is on the ADA from ramps and steps. We have so many steps, not a lot of ramps. The ramps we have are not ADA compliant. We also looked at the parking, ADA parking. We have 2 spots that are listed in blue for ADA handicap parking, which don't meet any regulation at all, except the fact that we spray painted the blue and the wheelchair there and called it a handicap spot. No offense, it's not one, right? So we looked at various things. Yankee Field, certainly those bleachers were hazardous. They still are hazardous. We have to build back a retaining wall behind the bleachers. We need to get ADA ramps out there and steps to get to Yankee Field. We looked at the field house, as Jeff pointed out very eloquently, that it was a need that once we do this, where are we going to put these things? We thought, well, one of the things I heard when I first got here was, where are the kids on Yankee whose parents dropped them off during the summer and they're taking their other child somewhere, or they're going off to the grocery store or wherever, a lightning storm comes up, where's the area of refuge for those kids to hide? That field's wide open. You could have a lightning strike out there. Now, I would like to argue the fact that the lightning strike would hit the pole first, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't want to have a child ever find out differently, right? So we looked at the field house and saying, what can we do to have a point where kids can run to and hide, get away from the weather until their parents come pick them up. We looked at the upper level addition. The fitness room became an issue, and I'll tell you why. That when we stage the whole project out, we're looking at how we're going to get materials in, and we're going to have to come across the track and the field. So if we don't do anything now up in that area, and we decided we didn't want to do the fitness room or the sport classrooms, that you're now locked in for the next 10 years. Otherwise, we're going to have to rip that turf up again before its useful life's over to be able to drive equipment over to build a building. So we said, well, wait a minute, if we're going to do this, let's go ahead and see what we can't do up there. What can we put up there? The fitness room became an issue because the current fitness room is woefully inadequate for what we have. It's way undervalued. It was never designed as a fitness room. Let's go ahead and design it right the first time and use something that we think we can not only use for our current needs, but also our future wellness needs. We looked at 2 new classrooms up there as well, because we anticipate having, between 300 or plus students coming into the district over the next 5 years. And while we've seen that uptick, as you might remember in the previous presentations at the elementary school, by the time this project gets done, those kids are going to be in middle school and getting into the high school. And this way gives us an opportunity to think ahead and say, we anticipated this, we have some extra space. The lower building, we needed some public toilets, we needed some team rooms. Obviously, there's a ticket booth that was there that we're looking to maintain. The next group of things, and this thing takes forever to come back up, so I'm sorry about that. But we looked at the high school, and I'll get this up here in a second, but the high school interior, we still don't have air conditioning in the gyms. We're one of the only teams, one of the only schools in the area that don't have that. Pardon?
We're the only Central League.
Only Central League team that has that. We looked at trainer room and storage. Again, I'm sorry this thing's not cooperating tonight. And as much as I'd like for it to cooperate, it won't. But we looked at the athletic wing air conditioning. We looked at high school interiors with new classrooms, taking the training room and turn that into a classroom. We looked at the natatorium. The natatorium was clearly an area that we needed to have some ADA issues taken care of, as well as the locker rooms, as well as the pool upgrades, pool systems upgrades. We need to look at replastering the pool deck, or rather the pool itself, and we need new tiles on the deck. Those are original from 1971. And then we got into, well, what happens with the maintenance area? And we thought we'd move the maintenance area to a new location. We thought about the access road. We thought about the alternatives that we have. Oh, thank you. That's much easier. So we also looked at, these items here, and then we looked at tennis court seating and said, well, we currently, one thing I noticed during the whole Katie Sampson event is that we really don't have that tennis court very well laid out for anybody to go up to it with a wheelchair, or for that fact, somebody sit there and watch a tennis match. So we try to look at all the sports, try to look at everything we needed to take care of. That's how we got to where we were. I'm happy to, these guys are happy to answer any questions about any one of these, but just trying to give you a general, sense of how we got to where we were.
So can I think what we need to do next, it sounds like Amy and Susan have questions about the presentation that was presented in last month's board meeting. They have some kind of specific, well, yeah, your question about the trail and everything, that's how that overlay works in the survey. And Amy's is similar, how does this fit with the trail? It sounds like some other people
Yeah.
have questions that maybe weren't answered on the tours we took, and you want to ask them of the
I'm not
architect.
sure they're questions so much as comments. So is this a time to move into board?
So I was just going to say, since 5 of us were actually at the board meeting last month and had an opportunity to have our questions answered, I'd like to start with the new board members if they have questions, and let them ask their questions first. I'm not going to not let you talk, Lydia. I just want to let them ask their questions first. Jeffrey? Sorry, I'm looking at Bradley.
I'll just say that we have that presentation here if we need to refer to any of it, okay?
My question was a process question, and I've already asked it, so we can move on to the next person. Thanks.
I'm going to start with the non-committee members. So, Jeff?
Is it okay if I pass for now and maybe come back after the new committee? I'm still trying to digest a little thing.
No, that's fine.
I mean,
That's
my
fine.
question, it may not be relevant for this part of the conversation, but, and I did pay, we were at the last committee meeting or watched on television. It has to do with the other side of it, which may not be appropriate to ask tonight, which is the financing piece of it. So I don't know if that's appropriate.
And that's a good,
I don't think it's actually wrong to ask it.
No,
Ken,
you
if you wanna
can't,
talk
we
about it.
can't ask finance questions tonight, that's fine, and Michelle could jump in, but we do have next week We have PFM coming and our bond council coming to our board meeting next week, so we can focus on some of the finance aspects. Some of the documents that have already been shared, we can discuss next week as well, but they certainly can be asked tonight too.
And let me just jump in to finish the thought for that, because it is a process thing, and I don't really have many questions about this. Months ago, we looked at our bonds. We took a look at how much do we owe right now. We actually, Bradley referenced it in the audit report about how much debt service we have right now. And we had our bond counsel walk us through how much we could even conceivably ever borrow, and it's a much larger number. Part of the reason we're not looking for a vote tonight, which all due respect to Tim Henkel, is that that's the other piece of this, right? So we're contemplating a project. You guys, this is really, 4 of you, this is your first opportunity to ask questions as a board member. And then next week, hopefully we're gonna come up with some kind of notion of a recommendation for next week's board meeting. And in addition to that, as Ken said, we're gonna be prepared to give you a presentation of, here's what it might look like to finance this. Because, along with believing in the project and sincerely believing in it and thinking that this is the right thing for a lot of reasons, it's also my responsibility as chair of finance, but just as a believer in this project, to help us all understand and help us as a board walk through how can we responsibly finance this. And that is, of course, a critical component. So that is coming next week. It is part of our board meeting. So
And
there you
just
go, Jeff.
To be fair to other members of the board, I think we heard from bond counsel in our finance committee meeting. I'm not-
Months ago.
Right, but I don't think it was the full board that heard it.
Was it?
So if people, yeah.
Yeah, it
So,
wasn't.
but Jeff, if you have questions you want to ask tonight, or if you want to send them to Michelle in advance, feel free to do that. All of you are welcome to send questions in advance if you think of things you want to make sure get addressed. Nancy?
I was going to have a similar question regarding the financing, and I guess it was interesting to see the different scenarios, knowing or understanding that the next phase would be the schematic design. Is that correct? And as of now, the architect's not doing any work at this point. At a stop, we're at a stop.
Oh, he's here, but yeah.
I know. I'm sorry.
This isn't work.
But no, just to clarify, we're on a holding pattern right
To
now.
answer your question, right, yeah, we are not furthering the design at this point. We're awaiting a decision from the board on whether or not this is
To
the
move forward
option that we want to
With
pursue.
the schematics.
So,
Okay.
and the piece that we covered from a financial standpoint a while ago when we engaged you for this, and either you or Mark, if you would kind of just refresh people's memories, we've already kind of negotiated, I can't recall what the fees would be for the other phases, so if you could explain that to people, what the architect's fees would be for the next phase of the project,
That
or
was
have we
my
not
question.
engaged you for that I mean, I know we haven't engaged you for that, but we haven't negotiated it yet?
No.
Okay.
No, we do not have a contract to continue.
So the numbers that are in this fee
Are
scenario that you gave us
hypothetical,
are,
right.
that's a hypothetical, but the total architect's fee of 306 on a 4.1 million is based on your standard percentage
That's
of
right, a
something, or it's an
typical
hourly rate?
industry standard for a project of this type.
Okay,
Right.
so that's part of the piece that's missing, and what we need to understand is what the fees will be for your work and a construction manager's work. I know it's built into the 28,
It is.
right, for the schematics, but also, down the road, if we go that far, then what will the construction documents, I mean, I think it's helpful to understand, and also, this may be part of the piece that you share with us, Mark, but to understand, presumably you don't engage an architect for schematics and not know what it will cost to do construction documents and the rest of it. So presumably, if we
Right.
take a next step, it will show us what each level of work will cost.
Yes, typically you would select an option to continue, then that option would become the basis of a contract that would then be negotiated for the entire project.
Right.
That's not to say you can't stop it
Right.
short of that. I mean, there's vehicles within the contract to do that, but we're not having to come back and negotiate again at every milestone.
Okay, and then is it, because I think that this breakdown was for a specific piece, but does the contract typically have those milestones of like, this is schematics, this is construction, or is it really a
Yes.
percentage of the rest?
Yeah, there's the milestones are broken down.
Okay,
And these are again, the industry terms, schematic design, design development, and those are a percentage of the overall effort.
Okay.
And then each one of those phases requires an authorization to proceed, not necessarily a board vote, but somebody's telling you, yep, this is good, this is approved, and continue. So,
Okay.
so that's all, well-designed through the American Institute of Architects, and
So it's an
they-
AIA
they've-
contract.
It's an AIA contract, and
Steve,
theoretically,
could you
they-
share with us in 2 or 3 minutes, or maybe it's a little more, just what, because it's come up now a couple of times, what
Right.
is this timeline? What are these next pieces? What does it mean to draw the schematic drawings? What does it mean to
Sure.
prepare them for bid, or for, just talk about that for a moment for everyone.
Yeah, okay, sure. The design process in its totality. So the study phase is concluded. The architect with engineering assistance, and if I neglect to say architect and engineer at any point in time, that's what I mean to say, the design team. And because we all have a role to play in putting together a complete design process. And so the first phase beyond the study and the selection of options is what's called schematic design. And that's taking what is a concept and developing it into a design that has a program. So square footages are established, adjacencies, function, that sort of thing. Sizes are established. And then, so that takes that option and turns it even more than it is now into a complete project. And then that gets approved, reviewed and approved by you as the owner. And then the next phase is design development. So it's taking what is that schematic design plan that includes all those adjacencies, some basics with regard to engineering systems and requirements and goals, and outline specifications perhaps, and then drills even deeper, and then we start to look at, well, okay, we know how big the room is, but what goes on in there? What's the casework? Where's the marker board? How much fitness equipment is there? What's the power that's required for that? All those sorts of things, and that's a much more detailed review. And then that is and we would define those percentages again. So as you saw, we were alluding to the fact that through that process, that's about 35% of our effort. And then again, I should say that involves detailed reviews with other constituency groups. So the trainer, for example, we would meet with and design that training room down to where are the receptacles and what pieces of equipment are going in there. Then there's an approval of that as sort of the completion of the design development. And then we would move into construction documents. And also there's checks against at the schedule and the scope and the budget at all of these milestones to make sure all those things are on track. And then construction documents is taking that approved design and developing it into a set of documents that's suitable for public bidding. And so, that set of 20 or 30 drawings becomes 100 and 150 drawings, and it's a stack, and then there's spec books that go along with that, and then the detailed engineering, so the electrical panels, for Hugh, the stormwater management systems, and calculating the size of all the pipes and all that sort of thing that is going to create a successful project. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, usually with the site civil, what happens, we're kind of ahead of the game because we have a prolonged period of review with the township at the county conservation district. So at a DD level, design development level, that's normally when we start doing the land development plans. And we submit and go through the agencies for review. As Steve, they keep on refining their design and stuff, and so a lot of our stuff will have input from PennDOT, the township, the county conservation district, any other agency that we have to deal with. And once that's all combined, that gets us to the construction document level. So we have more agency input that we have to deal with, so.
Yeah, I just want to point out to people, because I think you started talking and I had a recollection of seeing this. The broader presentation that was at last month's meeting that I think we all got a copy of actually has on page 14 the project schedule and gives kind of the detail. I mean, it's still pretty generic, but it gives you a sense of how long each of these phases will take and where there are key milestones. Sorry, yes, Susan, go ahead.
My only question was, does your fee structure include a certain amount of time at attendance at land development meetings?
Oh, absolutely.
It does?
Yeah.
What kind of budget do you allow for that, for land development?
Well,
10 hours, 30 hours
Oh.
at meetings?
It's in our fee. I mean, we know we're gonna be attending those meetings.
Okay,
That's
all
part-
right, good.
That's part and parcel.
Thank you.
It's also board meetings are included.
Have
in
you
that
done
fee.
work in Radnor before?
Yeah, he has, yeah.
Oh, all right.
So that got us through design development, construction documents, and then that package that's again suitable for public bidding, which is a much higher standard than a lot of other projects endure. And so those documents are then released for public bidding by contractors. And then there's a bid period, and then we respond to questions and issue addenda and that sort of thing, and have a pre-bid meeting where you walk bidders through the process, and then bids are received. And then that's the point at which the estimate becomes a bid. And it's a result of that time, that point in time, what the market bears in terms of the value of this work that we're incorporating. And in those bid documents, as Mark alluded to, there would be alternates, because of course the bidding process is an unknown one. What the climate will be at that time. We have a strong following of contractors that bid our work, and so we're competitive in that way and provide a competitive bid environment for you. But then the numbers are opened, and then the board can review that again against the budget. And then if something is out of alignment, then we have this vehicle in terms of alternates to say we can prioritize changes within the award that bring us back in line. And whether that be adding something in because the bids came in low, little in a competitive environment, or if, as unfortunately has been the case lately, in a very competitive environment where we're seeing a fair amount of escalation year over year the past few years, that we may need to scale back. And so there's a way to do that so there isn't a bust, and the overall success of the project isn't put in jeopardy because of those numbers. And then we enter once contractual negotiation and of selection that we go through in terms of making the selection, and all the times there is some negotiation among the board about what those alternates and those priorities. Then those contracts are executed and signed. And then we enter into the construction administration phase, where the building's under construction, the site's under construction. There's observation that goes on of that, and then that's how you bring it to reality in the physical world.
So just to clarify.
That was
'cause-
quick. I
yeah.
hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's very helpful. Amy and Susan's questions before, the drawings that you gave us currently don't account for the trail and some other thing. But when you do schematics, you would account for the fact that there's, if we agree to it, which it seems like we will, the easement for the township to put a 10 or 12 foot wide trail along Lancaster Avenue.
Correct.
Survey would be updated
Yeah,
with
we've talked about that.
information.
Yeah,
I didn't give them that information since we
Okay.
don't know what the scope of that trail is at this point
Got
until
it.
we have some sort of clarification from what easement's going to be involved.
okay, but we've talked about, I mean, you guys have a sense of it. You just
Oh,
don't-
yeah, and-
We're aware of it.
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Any design would have to incorporate that, and it's gonna have to be marked and maybe flashing signals. at different
Right,
days.
you guys just didn't put anything down, because if it's not there, and
It's-
you,
we don't-
why create something? and- Okay. Lydia?
Yeah, so, thank you. Well, I
Yeah, I know,
haven't
but
asked a
Lydia's had a
single
bunch, so
thing.
she's got a
I
bunch.
have-
Let's let
I
her
have-
go. Yeah, sorry.
So I have questions and comments on a lot of different levels. Some of them are directed at my fellow board members. Some of them are questions for you. And I'm going to start by giving some context to my comments. Fortunate for me, this is occurring right around the holiday times. So I've had the good fortune of running into a lot of community members who I will classify as very engaged, very caring, very involved community members. This comment is actually to my fellow board members. And what I discovered, which is what I suspected, this community does not know about this process. And I need to thank the steering committee for all your time and all your effort. And that isn't any indictment on anyone who's worked on this project so far. But it is our responsibility as a board to represent this entire community. And this, this is a grand idea. And believe me, I'm a huge champion of our students and their successes. I think you all know that about me. But we represent everyone in this community. And when you have people that I know are caring and engaged and follow politics, and when they pretty much unanimously look at me with a blank stare when I say this board is considering a $27 million expenditure at the high school, that causes me alarm. For us as a body that need to represent the whole community. So this is to my fellow board members. And I also think, just procedurally, I think it is completely unfair to ask 4 brand-new board members to jump in the middle of a project of this magnitude and sort of say, do you have any questions? Because here it is, let's vote. I mean, that is just absolutely not fair. And I'm speaking from experience because I have sat up here for many years, more than anyone else who's sitting at this table. And I have had community members come to the board and wag their finger at me and tell me that I'm robbing the taxpayer for projects that are, 1/6 the expenditure of this, with much more educational explanation behind them. And we've still had people come and say, how dare you raise our taxes? And I find it highly ironic that, and I've said this before, I have typically been one of the more liberal board members in the past, and now I'm kind of the one going, whoa, what about the taxpayers? So I do understand the irony in all this, but it is our job, people, to represent everyone. And I think you new people are being put in a very uncomfortable position, and I don't think that this is the right thing for our community to ask you to do this at this point. So that's the start of my comments. Now, in the past, when we have done sort of the turf field projects and other sort of facilities projects that will benefit community groups, we've asked those groups to chip in. And they've been actually very, willing to sort of partner with us. So I believe the first turf field, we were a third partner, and one of the lacrosse group was a third partner, and the township was a third partner. I may have that all wrong, but we were not a major funder of that. It was community groups that came forward. So before we go anywhere with all of this field expansion, we need to go to our sports groups and get people on board to set up, fundraising for this. And so that would be Radnor Soccer, Radnor Youth Lacrosse, Radnor Aquatics, I guess the youth football groups, and the township. We need to get everybody helping us out here because they love to come and say, 80% of your taxes go to the school district. Well, but everybody benefits from it. So I think that I haven't heard a thing about that. I really would like to see those partnerships. And like Mr. Pajukas, thank you so much for providing us information about Radnor Aquatics. I am not intimately involved with the finances of these organizations, but I do understand that they have money and they have people really interested in, these kind of improvements, and so let's get them to partner with us. So I think that absolutely has to happen before we commit a dime to this. My next question, so this is with regard to the fitness facility, and I credit a community member for sort of asking me this question when I was explaining this project to somebody. And they said, well, isn't it a good idea to have our students go over to the Philadelphia Sports Club? They get a little exercise going over there. They're using a facility that's already there. It's probably going to have better equipment than we should go out and buy anyway. So my question is, what would it cost to buy 50 or 70 memberships to the Philadelphia Sports Club and kind of have that be, why build a new fitness facility less than a block from where we actually already have a state-of-the-art, gym? Like, how lucky are we that it's right there? So why reinvent the wheel? So what would it cost? I'd like to see a cost comparison of that versus how much we're going to spend on a fitness facility. I just thought that was a great idea. I hadn't thought of it. The other question a community member put to me was, say you're a property owner who pays $6,000 in taxes a year. They wanted to know what a $27 million expansion at the high school, what would that actually mean for the homeowner? And I didn't have that breakdown, but I'm sure it would be easy enough to estimate. So I think we need to have some idea. What are we talking about for a $6,000 a year taxpayer and for a $12,000 a year taxpayer? How much more would their taxes go up if we did this whole thing? The other thing that I haven't heard, and I really want us to at least talk about this. When we did Radnor Elementary and we did Radnor Middle School, it was a real point of pride that they were LEED certified facilities, which means they're green energy. A lot went into designing them that way, and it was a point of pride, and people would come from around the state to see what we did in terms of energy efficiency in both of those construction projects. So I haven't heard that about this one, and I think that there's a lot of interest in Radnor to making something. I mean, I think part of this involves a pool heater, and so I want to know more about why we haven't included the LEED certification in this, and just exploration. I don't, can we incorporate those things into it? And let's see. I have some other notes. So I do want to say, and they're not here, but I want to speak to the Hinkle family and to Katie Sampson particularly. And I want, just to the Hinkle family and the Hinkle siblings, I want them to know how much I just admire their family, just the love and devotion of that family, and just how they want to honor their sibling. And so I want them and Katie to know that I have them in my heart when I talk about this project. So from the beginning, what I want to do with this project is to get the ADA compliance pieces and the bleachers done. And to me, the rest of this, much of it is still, I am not convinced that this community is willing to pay for that. So along with that thought of mine, I want to say back to the administration, really, I guess. Tell me what you can do for $7 million. Tell me what you can do for $10 million. If it turns out that the community only wants to spend $7 million on this, what are your priorities? Say they want to spend 10. What are your priorities? It may be that the community's changed and they do want to spend this kind of money. I can only tell you from my experience that that hasn't been the case in the past, and most of those people still live in this community. And I can only think either they don't know about it, or I can't explain why we're not hearing, sort of that question like, well, what about my taxes? And so I am still at the point where, back to my original spiel, I do not think the majority of community members know about this, and that's to my colleagues. And I don't think it's fair to ask new board members to vote on this, and so we are not ready. We are not ready, in my mind, to do anything but the ADA compliance pieces. That is where I still am on this, and so
Okay.
talk it up.
So Mark, just before you, just the one piece on the financing that I wanted to mention, because again, to my point to Susan, that only those of us who sit on the finance committee necessarily had a lot of detail on this, but I believe that there is a possibility for structuring the bond in such a way that it doesn't actually increase taxes, because we can do a wraparound, or there's, so the answer to the community for this project is actually, we've been so good about managing money in this district, we've been so careful about our bond refinancings, that we could actually do this without raising, largely without raising, first of all, portions of it are already in the budget. The turf replacement and the track replacement are already in the budget. Portions of the pool work are also already in the budget. But actually, because of the excellent stewardship of prior boards and Michelle in managing the finances of this district, we actually have the very fortunate position with the bond market the way it is to potentially do this without raising taxes. I personally want to say to the new board members, I think you knew about this. You're all welcome to step up and say something. I want to let Amy ask her questions first. But I would hope that, A, you feel comfortable coming to me as the chair of the facilities committee, or to Susan as the president of the board, privately. You're welcome to say it publicly. And you're welcome to vote against it if it's something you don't think you're prepared to vote on. I mean, that's, everybody on this board has a right to act their own conscience.
Sarah,
So,
before
Amy,
you
go
get
ahead.
feedback, I think it would be helpful to frame a few things. First of which is, what exactly, for the sake maybe of the new board members and for all of us, we're going to put forth a recommendation for something we're going to vote on next week. Maybe we can sort of flesh out conceptually what that thing is that we're going to be voting on, and then take feedback and ask the new board members if they feel comfortable about what it is they're actually going to be asked to vote on next week. Would that make sense to sort of flesh that out a little bit first, conceptually?
I would like to respond to some things that Lydia shared, even
Okay.
before we flesh it out. But
Okay.
I know that you said you have questions.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that you answered it. I just want to make sure that I heard it correctly. Forgive me, I forget your name.
You.
Hard to keep up with everybody. But I was wondering, again, the different land development plans and the water, I'm trying.
Stormwater management.
Thank you, stormwater management. That stuff can be done in tandem with the schematic work, right? So that it's not like, if there's some sort of delay in the stormwater response or whatever, that's gonna adversely impact. You guys have, that's sort of systematic in these projects, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, that's reassuring that those things can work in tandem. And like Sarah said, some of the things that we're talking about in this project are already in sort of our quasi-capital plan. So we're already counting on doing some of these things as a district anyway. I don't know if they're formally in the budget or not, but as you look at our 5-year capital plan, as however it's fleshed out at this point, we're gonna be doing them anyway. I think I mentioned that at the last meeting. The project, I wanted to ask about the project schedule. Is that something that you guys can continue, I guess administration, to refine for us in more detail as we go along? One of the things I'm sensitive to that's not in the project schedule at this point and was so effective with our Start School Later initiative were community sessions, which we probably want to have. I mean, we've now had an example of a pretty, I don't want to say revolutionary, but certainly we were trying something that uprooted longstanding tradition and practice in our district, and I think we did it pretty successfully. And I give a lot of credit to the administration and the strategy there, which was, as we're doing the work and developing plans and moving things along, we're very intentionally making sure that we are having as many touch points as possible with our community so that at the end of the day, nobody says, I didn't know about this. There'll always be one. But for the most part, we will work till the sun goes down to make sure that everybody knows this project is going on. So if you believe, administration and board, that that's something that's important, I would say maybe we should plan that now as someone says, when is this all gonna happen? Budget time for those kinds of things, if you think it needs a time allocation. And then my last question was, what kind of resolution is it that we're looking to, what kind of board action is it that we're looking forward to next week, putting on the agenda? That was my final question.
Okay, so maybe, I think the presentation, we've had most of what you were gonna say. People had a chance for questions, Lydia's had a chance to make her comments. I know Susan had comments, Liz had comments. We would just wanna go around from comments, I think they were.
If Lydia is the longest serving member, I'm now the second longest serving. That's not much. It's 6 years, but it's something. Yeah, I think we're probably, well, whatever. I think it is both true and I think it's both probably somewhat accurate and somewhat not accurate that the community doesn't know about this. I think that there's only a small segment of the community that ever pays attention to what's going on in the district. We raise taxes every year. Every year we raise taxes. The index, a little above the index, below the index. I don't know. I mean, the 5 of us who serve on the board, I don't get feedback when we raise taxes. I get Lydia, I'm speaking. I don't get feedback when we raise our taxes. I don't. Maybe other people do. I do not. I know that in the last month I've received, you and I both received many emails, people coming out of the woodwork. I know you don't know me. I know I never get involved. I know that they're all in support of this project. Every single one of them. There was one email Ken and I got that the person was against this for an unrelated reason. It really had nothing to do with the project. I happen to disagree with actively seeking the community groups contributing in a significant way. And it's not that I don't mind them coming in, and there may be portions of this where that might make sense. But one of the challenges we faced when we did the 3-way agreement on Prevo Field was when it was then time to come up with the money to replace Prevo the first time it needed to be replaced. Going back to those groups, that was a challenge. It was also a challenge when the community groups believed, and they rightly believed, that they were entitled to certain rights and uses of the fields because they had contributed. Now, rightly, because that was part of the agreement, I would step cautiously into that, because are we then talking about opening up our building to community groups who feel they have the right to be in here? So I just think that that's something that I will be voting on this long before I go and flesh out the details of community group contributing. Lydia,
You mean financially, Susan,
yeah,
just for clarification?
Financially, yes,
Right.
yes, financially. They're contributing their thoughts and their feedback, and that's all really important right now. Lydia, I appreciate that you think it's unfair for this new board to vote on this now, but you didn't want the old board to vote on it, the board that had been studying it for over a year. Which is it? The old board that studied this, who had been following it and who were not brand new, shouldn't have voted on it, and the new board shouldn't vote on it. If you just don't want anybody to vote on it, I guess so, but you've now said you didn't want either board to vote on it, so that's confusing for me. I don't personally support, everybody's welcome to their opinion, having our students go off-site to get their fitness opportunities. I think it's a shame now that our crew teams have to pay money out of pocket to go have space to work out in the off-seasons. I think that's really a shame, and it's a financial burden for those families. I think that there's safety issues about our kids going off campus to go work out at a facility. We can't control things like background checks and who's in the gym and there's a lot about intentionally sending our kids off campus for their fitness opportunities that I think are problematic. Sarah talked about we do need to have the conversation about finances. I am the first, the second, the third, and the 9th who will say that, of course, we have to talk about how can we responsibly finance this. I absolutely agree with Lydia about we should be talking about are there lead opportunities in this building. Actually, I think we should be going after money. Is there ADA grant money we can go after for some of the ADA components? Can we try to get some federal dollars for becoming compliant, which leads to my next question. For anyone who just wants to do the bleachers in ADA, Jeff said it quite eloquently. As soon as we start doing the ADA, we are short on bathrooms, folks. Where are the bathrooms going? We have to do the bathrooms. There's just parts of this that build on one another in a pretty large way. I know many of you have said this. It's certainly, I appreciate it, the notion of trying to gauge what the community wants and what the community supports. Every time I run into anybody, and I too am running into people at this time of year, I ran into people at the League of Women Voters luncheon. Have you heard about our high school infrastructure project? And they kind of, no. I said, oh, I really want to tell you about it. And I've been telling people. I want people to know. I want them to tell us how they feel and all of that. But at the end of the day, this is my job to vote. It's our job. And this is, if I had gauged my vote on the community feedback that I got about full-day kindergarten, I assure you, that was way more negative. I got told I was endangering people's lives, children's lives, by voting for full-day kindergarten. People came out of the woodwork against full-day kindergarten. And so at the end of the day, I still had to vote my conscience and my belief of what I thought was right for the district and what we could afford and what we can do, responsibly here in Radnor. So, I want to seek the input, and yet it's our responsibility, guys. That's part of being elected. There were people who were against this there were people at the November meeting who have historically and traditionally been some of our loudest critics. They were in the November meeting, actually. They heard the presentation. They didn't get up and speak. They didn't say we're opposed. They haven't sent emails. They were at the meeting. I mean, some of our typically most vocal critics. So I do think that this is out there to people, and I think, as Amy has indicated and Lydia indicated, and I think we all agree, as much as we can do to get this, and Jeff's working hard at it, as much as we can do to get this out there so that everybody is well informed, is really important. That's all I wanted to say.
Andrew, you're good?
I'm good, thanks.
How about Bradley?
I've already asked a few questions. I'll defer to other members.
Okay.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Liz.
Okay, I can't speak on behalf of the other new board members, but I can say that I don't feel that it's unfair for me. I have been following it for over a year, and I've been following it very closely. So the good news is none of this is a surprise to me, and I conceptually I'm there. I believe in it. Mr. Brooks took us through, and Mr. Batchelor, we went on a tour, and what I saw was an over 50-year-old facilities, that were in need of attention. And so I actually have a few specific things that I'll get to after. But, how we finance it, of course, I want to do that responsibly. While I wasn't in those budget meetings, I guess I had the benefit of hearing some of the discussion around how we can finance this, maybe retires when bonds retire, and how it wouldn't be an impact to taxpayers, and that obviously would be important. I 100% agree that we need a communications plan, and Jeff, I know how frustrating it is to, but meaning just to have someone say, I don't know about this, especially within our school community, especially within a booster group. Again, I witnessed firsthand, at the very end of the sleep study, I was actually in an elementary school meeting where someone raised their hand and said, why are we moving this so fast? We shouldn't, I need to hear more. So, I think unfortunately that's inevitable. But I do believe that we have a responsibility to get it out to the greater community, of which Mr. Brooks did do by offering, a public tour, multiple dates. Unfortunately, people didn't come, but I do think it's a compelling story when you explain, because even some people I know might say, hey, didn't we renovate the high school in I think it was 96, right? 90. When in fact we said, well, no, we didn't renovate the whole high school. So that's part of the messaging, the narrative that we have to get out there. So I do think there's a need to meet, I'd be happy to be part of that in terms of a communication plan to the broader community. Specifically, I just wanted to, and I'm going to say something that might actually say more money, but, in the tour, when we look at, I guess let me see where it is. It's page, the natatorium there, we're talking about, the high school interior alterations. I was kind of horrified by seeing the boys' locker room. So I know that
It was empty of students when we were there.
Yeah, so I know that we will have new showers and new team rooms, so that might alleviate some of that concern. But, there was floor chipping, and there was really, so I'm thinking there's efficiencies in at least addressing some of that, and maybe that happens later, but that looked like it needed a little TLC. So I'd just like to consider that. I'd also, just specifically when we talk about the new classrooms, I mentioned this to Ms. Berger, Ms. Batchelor, that I would love to hear a little bit from the teachers on that one. Like if we do get to this point where we're moving forward, what do they want to see in classrooms? Can we be forward thinking here? Because I'll just give an example. My kids have participated in the seminars classes, and the one that my 9th grader is currently in is really jam-packed. It's just rows of, there's over 30 kids, right? 40. So they're pretty jam-packed in a classroom, and it's a discussion-based model classroom. Well, do we have those facilities currently? And maybe this is an opportunity to look at how we frame out those rooms to make it so that whether it's seminar or whether it's, I think everything, when you look at colleges today, the rooms you go, they're much more collaborative spaces. Do we have enough of those? Should we be looking at that? So, and hopefully that's not it's how we frame out the room. It might be how we consider it, so it's not an extra cost, but it's just forward thinking and maybe getting some feedback from the teachers. So those are specific, but I think my process questions were more than answered. It's really just what is that next step to keep this moving forward. Thank you.
Anyone
Sorry,
watching,
yeah.
that's 2 teachers for that class.
With 40.
Yeah,
40
no.
kids.
Yeah,
There are 2
yeah.
teachers, just sorry.
I was going to clarify that too, because it did occur to me.
There are,
Well, I have a kid in that class too, so it's big. It's a great class. If you have an option to take the integrated class, it's great. Amy, you were done, I think? Yeah. Okay. Jeff and Nancy, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I'll just echo Liz's comment to say that, yeah, we have been engaged. This came up when we knocked on doors all summer, or late summer into fall, and I think it was incumbent upon us as responsibly running for office we came to meetings, several meetings. So not to say that we know all, we clearly do not, but that we are engaged. The big piece I mentioned earlier is learning next week, it sounds like, team on the other side of this coin, which is the coin. I think after that, I think how could we? I can only speak for myself. How can I possibly, without knowing the equations that are going to get us there? We don't know yet, but I know that we have smart people, and we've been working on this diligently. And I thank you all. And Mark, I appreciated the tour last week with Ken. And one thing I wanted to mention, I think it was, I forget who mentioned this. Maybe it was you, Mark. In 1999, when the high school was last renovated, my understanding it was for $35 million. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's $57 million in today's money. Just put that in the context.
Okay. So I know the last piece Amy asked about, it was something I wanted to get back to at the end. I think for next week, not next month, we're moving ahead. We're going to learn about the financing. And then my understanding, and we'll craft this kind of as we talk about the process behind the scenes, that does happen. We don't all meet as a board, we don't violate sunshine laws, but that I'll work with Mark and probably Susan to make sure that we have a proposal that, or a resolution that basically, I think the next step is to approve the architect to start the schematic phase. So obviously, you know, I think that we probably have the money for in our standard budget, but obviously is in tandem with that is understanding what those fees would be, or at least have a good sense of them, and then also how the bond financing would work, what money we might use from our own accounts if that was part of our plan. And Michelle will, I'm sure, walk us through all of that in detail. Any other questions?
I just wanted to add on I think getting back to this piece of paper that kind of took us a while to delve our way through.
I think it would be good if we could clarify something.
Well,
with that letter.
yes, but the reason that this has been presented to us is that even in our November meeting, there were a number of former board members, and myself included, who said, boy, what if we could do all the things but not this? And so, or, you know, there were board members who think we may not be able to do it with PennDOT and the road and all that. And so that was the reason that Mark and the architects worked to say, well, this is what it would look like to engage in the conversation. You know, say we're moving forward with schematics next week. Do we want them to include 9, 10, and 11? And start that process. And if, while we are concurrently getting a clearer answer about PennDOT. The one thing that we didn't really talk about tonight, but it is part of the story, is that even though the bleachers and ADA and all that stuff is actually the building, you know, we've had this ongoing challenge with traffic and parking up at the high school. Some of you might be familiar with trying to bring a kid to the school and the drop-offs and all that stuff. So I think that that's where this design, Jeff, I think you could speak to and say that that's the truth. That's why this idea of, well, maybe if we peel off maintenance and, you know, get it off of the building and put in this new driveway, but that also opened up an opportunity to bring in more ADA parking, which was another thing we are woefully lacking up at the high school. So anyway, all of that to say, you know, one of the things we may be looking at next week is, do we want to proceed with this part of the project that has a significant cost to it? You know, it's $4 million. But do we want, as we consider the schematic design resolution, do we want to include this piece of it, knowing that if PennDOT comes back with an answer that we just really can't do it, at certain stages it will cost us some money. Do we want to engage in that? Do we not want to engage in that? Maybe all 9 of us are in favor of it. Maybe 8 of us, 7, 6, 5, 4. You know, I don't know the number. It's probably not 9. Given Lydia's comments, it's probably not 9, but which is great. It's fine. So that will be specifically a piece, but that's the context for this piece of paper, is that we had said, well, what if we didn't do that, and what if we just looked at the design and then stopped it later? And so, am I accurately portraying why we got this piece of paper?
Yes.
Okay, good. So that's a piece of next week.
I had 2 quick last questions. On page 14 of last month's proposal, potential project schedule, it says, board approves option January 2020. If we have something on the agenda for next week, is that essentially what that means, board approves option?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're like 1 month ahead of schedule.
Yeah,
Hey.
I pushed them to change that to December. The steering committee wanted it to be November, and they said they wanted to not look pushy, so they made it
Okay,
January.
and Sarah, in preparing the finance thing, I don't know if this makes sense or not, but because the question had come up and maybe others have it too. If we take some of these things potentially out of our capital plan and move them into this project, how does that impact our finances as a district, for better, for worse, otherwise, options, drawbacks, that kind of thing? I don't know if it makes sense to address that next week, but since there's gonna be a lot of finance talk going on, that's something that I'm wondering about.
And that just made me think, have we ever put together what that total is that we were going to be spending anyway? Because
Yes, we actually have that.
Okay.
So I don't know if we have it tonight.
I
but
think
we
that
don't.
would be helpful.
No,
in
no,
even-
I mean, not at this point, but we can have that for next, that's right.
No, it's
We
not
have,
30.
we have put that work, and so, yes, we could have that for next week.
No good math happens after 9. Alrighty, so, I don't know what else we have.
I
So-
think Yeah, go ahead, Ken, I want to let you wrap up.
Well, I
Or
think,
Mark.
so moving forward is, the administration, will meet with board leadership. We will prepare, a recommendation on the agenda to engage the architect, to develop schematic drawings. What we need to know is, I think we will list the entire project, in those schematic drawings, but I think the discussion that still has to happen is, are we looking to engage for this entire project? Or are we looking, the example with, the 9, 10, 11, or, sorry, yeah,
That's
9,
right.
10, 11, that is still something that can be discussed, but the recommendation will be to engage the architect to develop schematic drawings on all the pieces that the board has in front of, that we have in front of us right now. Okay?
Sounds great. Yeah. Okay, so I think we've done our update and discussion on the high school infrastructure project. Does anyone have any new business? Okay. Final public comment? Does anyone want to speak to the okay. Great, we're adjourned. Thank you.